On the 1st of January 2021, Prime Minister Scott Morrison announced that he had changed one word in the second line of Advance Australia Fair. The anthem would now start, "Australians all, let us rejoice, for we are one and free." Commenting on this change, Morrison said that during the past year we have showed once again the indomitable spirit of Australians and the unified effort that has always enabled us to prevail as a nation. It is time to ensure this great unity is reflected more fully in our national anthem. Now, could the timing of those words be more unfortunate? In 2021, Australians are more divided than at any time in my lifetime, mainly because of the diktats of state governments.
You have to understand too, like people living in New South Wales, they have New South Wales hospitals. In Queensland, we have Queensland hospitals for our people. So
for most of us, borders have only ever been arbitrary lines on a map. Now you can't cross into another state without passing through a police roadblock where they will check that you have your papers in order. I have first-hand experience of this living on the New South Wales-Queensland border. Back in August, Queensland's idiot-in-chief told 16,000 New South Wales border residents they could no longer commute into Queensland unless they were an essential worker, even though there were no cases in the Tweed local government area and only a few in the Northern Rivers region as a whole. As one Gold Coast business owner put it, 100% of my business is over the border. I live in New South Wales and have spent years building a business on the Gold Coast. I've spent the last 17 years working towards having my own studio. Now I can't access my clients or any of my equipment because we were given 2 hours notice that the need to feed our children is no longer considered essential. Those restrictions remained in place for more than 3 months. I can also tell you that in that time, the number of border residents identifying as essential workers increased dramatically. Strange what happens when your livelihood is threatened. People will find a way. This is the monument demarcating the New South Wales-Queensland border where Coolangatta meets Tweed Heads. The road heading off into the distance is the aptly named Boundary Street. The New South Wales-Queensland border runs down the middle, which has never been a big deal until Queen Anna decided it was. What it meant for residents on the New South Wales side of Boundary Street was that if you drove out of the area, you couldn't get back in, because to do so, you have to drive up the Queensland side of the street, which was blocked off. As anyone in the area will tell you, if you live in Tweed Heads, Coolangatta is your community, and vice versa. It made no sense whatsoever to restrict movements of people living there. But then making no sense has been a hallmark of so many of the edicts of state governments over the last 2 years. For example, apparently if you were the girlfriend of an NRL player, you have an automatic COVID force field and are welcome in Queensland. However, if you are a Queensland resident just trying to get home from another state and your government changes the rules overnight, well, you can go fuck yourself. For some reason, walking through a mall by myself with my mouth closed, not talking to anyone, requires a mask. But if I see someone I know in the same mall, I can sit down across a small table, have a meal and engage in a good old chin wag without a mask. Trust the science. Actually, I do trust science. I just don't trust politicians and bureaucrats to come up with sensible rules that balance public health concerns with individual liberties. And even when politicians do on the odd occasion talk about freedom, you can't trust them to keep their word. Remember back in July when Prime Minister, "I talk a lot about freedom but take absolutely no action to safeguard it," Morrison proclaimed that the way to secure your freedom was to get vaccinated. Our mindset on managing COVID-19 has to change once you move from pre-vaccination to post-vaccination. That's the deal for Australians, Mr. Morrison said. Well, how's that working out? Let's take a trip down memory lane, shall we? Remember way back in September when New South Wales had a different premier. Gold standard boyfriend chooser Gladys said residents in New South Wales can start doing all those things we've been missing once 70% of the population is fully vaccinated against coronavirus. Now, she did add that, of course, at 70% there'll still be density requirements, QR code check-ins, validation that you're vaccinated, mask wearing in certain settings, so there'll be obviously constraints and restrictions in place, but compared to what we're going through now, life will be much better. She made those statements during the Delta outbreak, in which she caved to pressure to lock everyone in the state down, even in areas where there was zero COVID. Fast forward to the end of the year, and where are we? Well, we're in the exact same place in terms of restrictions. Oh, except 93.5% of the population over 16 years of age are double vaccinated. So call me sceptical, Prime Minister, that vaccination is the way to secure your freedom. For the record, I was fairly complacent about getting a vaccine for a disease that was virtually non-existent where I lived, but based on the Delta outbreak, I realised that COVID was eventually coming to town, so I weighed the costs and benefits of vaccination and decided the benefits far outweighed the costs. I mean, at this point you have to actively go out of your way to ignore the plethora of data on the efficacy of vaccines. I've heard some people say that vaccines don't work because they don't stop you from getting COVID. Well, who thought that they would? The flu is a coronavirus, and if you've ever had an annual flu shot or know anything about them, you'll know that flu shots don't stop you getting the flu. That said, if you don't want to be vaccinated, I respect your right not to be, and I don't think we should be segregating society based on vaccination status. But if you are one of these people that doesn't believe any of the data from official sources, you think it's all a conspiracy involving governments, Big Pharma, and Bill Gates trying to depopulate the earth, then do yourself and everybody you know a favour. Turn off the internet and take a nap, preferably until about 2025 or so. Now, to return to New South Wales, not only is New South Wales one of the most highly vaccinated states in Australia, but in the world. 93.5% of New South Wales residents over the age of 16 have received 2 doses, and 90% over the age of 12. New South Wales went from 8.5% double vaccinated in early July to 90% double vaccinated by early November for over 16s. Since then, it has taken a further 7 weeks just to get to 93.5%. As you can see, the vaccination curve has flattened dramatically. What that tells us is that pretty much everyone over the age of 16 who wanted to get the vaccine in New South Wales has had it, and that what is left is a small minority that don't want to get it, which is absolutely fine. So can we just ignore the obnoxious doomsday bedwetters who are just as annoying as the conspiracy theorists and get on with opening up? Now, the new Premier of New South Wales, Dominic Perrottet, set out to do exactly that. He rightfully implored the press and everyone else to stop paying attention to case numbers and focus on hospitalisation and ICU numbers. He did away with mask mandates and check-ins and stood firm in the face of criticism for a whole 8 days and then folded like a cheap deck of cards. Now you might say, well, his timing was unlucky because the relaxation of restrictions coincided with an explosion of the Omicron variant. But so what? We've got in excess of 90% of the population vaccinated and we're acting like it's 2020 with a variant by every measure that is far less virulent. At least we seem to be out of the lockdown phase because the public has no appetite for it. We can thank Dan Andrews for that with his snap 7-day lockdown, which started on August 5th, just 9 days after the previous 5-day lockdown in July. Turns out the 7-day lockdown was a little optimistic as it ended up being 78 days, by which time Andrews had succumbed to the realisation that the goal of zero COVID was an idiotic strategy. Some people are just slow learners, I guess. But amidst all the sniping between state governments and the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated, it's important to remind yourself that at every step you have been deprived of your basic freedoms by government, and then had it ransomed back to you in the form of a vaccine. And do you have your freedoms back? No, you don't. The message should be loud and clear by now. Governments do not trust you to decide your own level of risk that you are willing to bear. They want to tell you how to behave wherever you are and even in your own place of business. And if you don't comply, you can be shut down. Again, New South Wales was making steps in the right direction. They had done away with masks and mandatory check-ins, but told businesses, if you want to keep doing that, then go ahead and customers can make up their own minds. But alas, they wilted like a virile young man at the sight of a plus-size model. If there's any silver lining to the latest collapse of rationality in the face of hysteria, it's that whilst the Omicron variant spreads rapidly, it is far less virulent. Now, it's not clear where Omicron originated from, but the media, in their usual haste to scare the shit out of everyone, decided it was South Africa, specifically the province of Gauteng, home to about 16 million people. Take a look at the latest data from Gauteng. Omicron cases actually peaked on December 12th with 16,000 cases on that day. 5 days later, new cases were down to 3,300. The daily case numbers have collapsed, and the number of deaths for the Omicron wave in Gauteng is projected to be approximately 25 times lower than than the Delta wave. In fact, South Africa has now ended quarantines and contact tracing. But wait, the pessimists told us, South Africa has a relatively young population. We shouldn't jump the gun and declare the coast is clear. Okay then, how about London? Cases peaked at a level almost double that of Delta, whilst hospitalisations are at less than half and deaths are a fraction of what they were during Delta. Even The Guardian is publishing articles like this. Omicron is not the same disease we were seeing a year ago, and high COVID death rates in the UK are now history, a leading immunologist has said. And back to New South Wales. On December 28th, New South Wales recorded over 11,000 new cases, bringing the 7-day average to almost 7,000 per day. That's 4 times the peak of the Delta wave. And how are hospitalisations doing? Currently less than half the peak of the Delta wave. Yes, there is some lag between positive tests and hospitalisations, and those will continue to trend up. However, in September, amidst the Delta wave, New South Wales Health estimated that New South Wales could accommodate up to 579 cases in ICU with minimal impact on operations and would not approach maximal operation capacity until about 800 cases. As of December 28th, there are 61 people in ICU with COVID-19, and again, there'll be lags and this number will trend up, but we have plenty of capacity. The signs appear to be that the Omicron wave will be short and sharp, with higher case rates but much lower rates of hospitalisation and death, and will have receded by the end of January. Of course, that won't stop the doom and gloomers latching onto some other reason to lock you all down or make you wear masks or tell you how many people are allowed in your business. But here's a tip should you run into a D&G that has no problem with denying your basic freedoms so they can feel safe. Ask them what they do for a living. I know it's now popular to declare your pronouns, but what would be more useful in this discussion is for people to declare whether or not their income is affected by restrictions. Remember, the whole political and media class have not lost a day's pay during the past 2 years. Some have even decided to give themselves pay rises. Do you ever wonder why you don't hear the phrase, "we're all in this together" anymore? Even the politicians are no longer brazen enough to repeat that bullshit. At the height of the hysteria during the Delta outbreak in New South Wales, every journalist at Gladys's presses were berating her for not locking down harder and faster. Now imagine what the questions would have been like if, say, small business owners had been in attendance. I think you would have got a different perspective instead of "lock me down harder, daddy." On a personal note, I returned to Australia almost 6 years ago after being abroad for 14. 2021 is the first time I thought to myself that maybe that wasn't such a good idea. Now, I'm not surprised by government incompetency and overreach, but what I didn't expect was the extent to which large swaths of society are willing to give up their freedoms to governments under the guise of keeping them safe. Joe Hildebrand was right when he said Australia's panicked reaction to case numbers exposes an inconvenient truth. We Australians like to think we're a tough lot, but the truth is we're a bunch of bedwetters. It's time we found our balls. Now, there is a federal election coming up in the new year, and I'll be sure to cast my vote for a party that hasn't forgotten about protecting the freedoms of Australians. As usual, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you next time.